Welcome back to the Get Unstuck and On Target show. I'm Mike O'Neill with Bench Builders, and we're speaking with thought leaders to uncover tips to help you break down the barriers that are keeping you or your business stuck. Joining me today is my friend Jason Meucci. Jason is a leadership coach, team builder who helps leaders and organizations get the best out of their employees by empowering and inspiring them to be their best selves. Welcome, Jason.
Thanks, Mike. Yeah, you and I have been friends for a while now, and I've always sort of secretly wanted to be on this podcast. And so it's great. Thank you for making a sort of a goal or a dream come true. It's great to be here.
Well, I'm flattered by the comment. I very much wanted to have you on, and so I'm looking forward to our time together today. I've asked Jason to guide us through his Prelude to Leadership model. Specifically, I've asked if he would kind of share how being intentional about creating a sense of care, connection, and contribution for your team, how that can help you as a leader get your organization back on target and help unlock the greatness in your employees. So, Jason, I heard those 3 C's, and you call this model the prelude to leadership. What does that mean, prelude to leadership?
Yeah, that word is very intentional. I chose that for a reason. And if you think about, one of the definitions of prelude is an action or event serving as an introduction to something more important. And that's exactly how I envision this model working, and it's sort of how it's been playing out in my professional life and in the work I'm doing now. Is if you do this stuff at the outset before you maybe start going down the road of some harder work, it really creates a bigger space for people to really flourish and succeed, and makes all those goals much more achievable and all those dreams much more possible, because you do this stuff at the outset and you sort of do it ongoing before you prioritize it really before the task driven stuff. When you implement care, connection, and contribution into your culture, you're going to really open up, you're going to sort of grease the skid, so to speak, for some much more important and bigger work to come.
All right, thank you for clarifying. If you don't mind, what I'd like to do is go through these kind of one by one. The first one being care, and that is you describe prioritize and demonstrate holistic care for people as human beings, not as functions. Can we unpack that a little bit? When you say prioritize and demonstrate holistic care, what does holistic care mean?
Yeah, and before you even get into that, I want to stress how much care is the foundation to all of this.
Okay.
This, when I talk about how basic this stuff is, it's that's another reason why I called it a prelude, because it's so basic, and it maps to our basic human needs, and that's where that holistic part comes in, which I'll get back to your question in just a second. But when you think about Maslow's hierarchy of human needs, these things sort of map directly to that, whereas care is about the foundational needs we all have around just sort of safety and nourishment. And when it comes to care, I'm talking about physical well-being, spiritual well-being, emotional well-being, all these things that go into what makes us whole as a human being. And so often, leaders only sort of they talk to us about how we're doing work-wise, but we're all people, including leaders. And so a lot of this, it starts with self-care, but holistically, I'm talking about everything that makes up the human experience, and sort of acknowledging that those things are also important. I think the time has finally passed, thankfully, where, maybe this has been accelerated by COVID, but we're no longer a work person and a home person. We are human beings. And the more that we can acknowledge all the things that go into that, and the complexities and the beautiful parts of being human, and care for all those parts, the better people are going to perform, because they know that they're cared for.
You differentiate care for people as human beings, not functions. When you say functions, what do you mean by functions?
Yeah, we probably have all had experiences with bosses who only will talk to us about, status updates on work or tasks, or what's going on within our roles and responsibilities, but they don't talk to us very often about what's going on in our lives, or how do we want to grow? What do we care about, in addition to the context of our work? This isn't at all to minimize the importance of work talk. but it's just to amplify the importance of being a human being. And when you tend to those things, you really get the best out of people. And so when I, whoever I'm trying to lead or coach or whatever, I'm looking at that person as just that, as a person, and not, oh, this is a, an individual contributor or whatever their title may be. There's just so much more to people than that. And so that's what I mean. We have to look at people as people and not whatever role they may fill or whatever title they may have in your organization.
Jason, you made reference to the blurring the lines between work and home, since so many people now are working from home. Continue on this theme of caring. We have an audience of leaders who you're challenging us to demonstrate care. When you're working remotely, what might be some practical suggestions you have that a leader can do to demonstrate that you genuinely do care for the employees that you're working with or are working for you?
Yeah, well, hopefully, by now, all these months into the pandemic, hopefully leaders have gotten sort of, it's a sort of natural or standard part of the work week or the work day to just check in on, asking your people, how are you doing? How are you feeling? And really listen to that and don't accept fine as an answer. Just really be curious. Ask questions about, what people are struggling with, whether that's in life or in work, because we're all seeing each other's lives play out on camera in front of us now. It's no longer, there's this barrier is not there. In some cases we can kind of see literally for ourselves what's going on in people's homes and in their lives. And so being curious, there's an incredible amount of power that comes from being curious about what's going on with people and how they're doing and what you could do to sort of maybe move an obstacle out of their way, or ask what they're struggling with, or ask what's going on in their lives outside of work. How are they spending this quarantine? Some people may not have seen their team members for months. And so I would hope that in that span of time, you're asking, and you're learning about what's going on in their lives, and really checking in on, how people want to grow and what their intrinsic motivators are, and just carving out, in those one-on-one conversations that you're hopefully having on a weekly basis, if not more, just carve out time to talk about the person in front of you and not the work that has to be done, and just figure out, who they want to be, not just what they want to do.
Great response. And I love that concept of we're living a life on camera. I haven't heard it said that way, but boy, is that not true. You mentioned also in your 3 C's the importance of connections, and the way you kind of lay it out for me ahead of time: cultivate meaningful connection between people, from people to purpose and from purpose to possibilities. Walk us through connection, please.
Yeah. So, as the way I sort of envision these is sort of stacked on top of each other, much like Maslow's hierarchy. They just they build up to each other. And so as we go up through care, you have to have that care first before you can start to really form a connection with a person. And that connection happens through, the empathy that you've shown, the interest you've shown in that person. And so connection is where you really start to feel that special energy. I think Brene Brown talks about, she defines connection, I think, as the energy that exists between people when they feel seen, heard, and valued. And for me, that's what this whole model is all about, is making people feel seen, heard, and valued. And at the end of contribution, sort of at the top of this mountain, we're going to get to that, where we talk about mattering. But that middle step is connection. Whereas I am taking time or making the effort to connect with you on a really, again, a human level, by asking things that have nothing to do with work, finding out what you're interested in, and then, building connections between your teammates, creating, have the first 5 or 10 minutes of your team meeting, again, be not about work whatsoever, but asking generative questions about what people are interested in, finding out fun facts about them. And I'm talking about questions that go beyond just your typical icebreakers. Those are fun too. But I like to ask questions that really get to the heart of what makes people tick and what's important to them and what they're interested in, and sort of, what their goals are. And so I'll ask questions like that. And it creates a real-time sense of connection, because you're having this deeper conversation and you're carving out space for topics that you don't normally talk about with workmates. And just organically, you can start to sort of feel those biochemicals flowing because you're connecting with people, because you're learning about who they are and what makes them tick. And so I think the best leaders, not only are you doing that, you're having these conversations one to one, and then with your team, and you listen. You listen very closely for things that matter to people, because those are bells that you can go back and ring later as a leader. You can give them a gift when it comes to the recognition portion of this, which is tied to contribution. Think about the things that you learned about that human being in those conversations. So it's a real time win because you're having these great conversations. But for leaders, it's a really helpful tool to really listen to what matters to people, so that you can take those little nuggets of information and use those to build a more influential relationship with people and to better serve them as a leader.
You began describing how this is almost something we need to visualize as kind of layers: care, connection, and then you made reference to contribution. That how important it is to individuals. It's an innate need to feel valued. Let me share with our viewers and listeners. You write, create a sense of contribution by empowering people to use their unique strengths and gifts and recognizing them for how and why they make a difference. It's a pretty powerful sentence there. How do we do that as leaders?
Yeah. So yeah, as we move from connection to contribution, and again, that these do stack on top of each other, because you have to feel connected so that you know how people want to contribute. And through the process of care and connection, hopefully you have discovered people's strengths and their dreams and their superpowers, and how that they want to make a difference in the world. And then you can create, you can design work that allows them to use their superpowers. And sometimes you can be as simple, how often do we stop and ask our people, hey, is there a skill or a strength you have, or maybe even an interest you have, that you feel like you are not getting to use enough in your course of work?
Mm.
And let them talk about that. And maybe there's some, there's probably an enormous number of ideas or innovative possibilities that can come from those conversations, and just create the space for people to use their favorite muscles. I mean, it's just a really energizing thing when someone, asks, how would you most like to contribute? I'm not going to just pigeonhole you into whatever work I need you to do. Maybe we do need to excuse me, maybe we do need you to do that work, but how you do it is up to you. And that's a big, really, give people ownership of how they get work done. You can lay out the desired outcomes maybe as a leader, but let them design their own solutions. It's incredibly empowering for people when leaders show that trust to let people get the work done in a way that uses their strengths. Maybe there's an opportunity for people to sort of exchange their knowledge base. I think I love to create opportunities, or encourage leaders to create opportunities for teammates to teach others what they're great at, for those who want to learn. It's really, really empowering for people to have a chance to share their expertise. It just really, I think, uplifts them, which is what leadership should be all about. And so designing work in a way that lines up with not only people's strengths, but, again, through care and contribution, you've hopefully learned about how your people want to grow. And so give them assignments that help them do that. Don't just give them assignments where they're just sort of having to do, checkbox task work, but give them assignments that feed their goals and their growth, desires. And so when you do that, it's just incredible. You create a huge sense of commitment and engagement, and intention to stay, because people feel like what they are doing matters. One, it matters to the organization, but it also matters to them, because they feel like they are getting a chance to use their best skills.
Jason, I love as you describe this, how these things begin to kind of fit together. If you are going to demonstrate that you really care, you're a leader who cares. And one way you demonstrate that is you give people on your team the opportunity to shine, to play to their strengths. What I really loved is your recommendation to ask those same people who have those strengths to be able to come alongside other members of the team. And if that happens, you increase the likelihood that connection is built. Am I understanding that correctly?
Absolutely. They are, they absolutely, they stack on top of each other, these three C's, but they're very sort of, it's almost like a positive feedback loop. The more you do one, it kind of just creates this sort of flywheel effect. And they do all sort of fit together. You can't really have all of them without, you need all of them. They all need each other. And the more you lay those foundations during the care, phase and the connection phase, the more you're going to enable and empower people to contribute. And I want to point out, contribution is great when we feel like we are using our best gifts in the line of work, or we're doing work that aligns with our personal purpose or professional goals. But it only goes so far without the other key sort of partner to contribution, which is recognition.
Mm.
That's what really makes a difference, is when we are literally seen and valued for how we are contributing, and having a leader that points out how what we do makes a difference, or sometimes maybe just how who we are makes a difference. That's a really, really empowering or energizing thing for someone to hear, is for to have a leader or even a peer, and I stress the importance of peer-to-peer recognition in this as well. Have them, point out in real time, hey, how you did that thing really made a difference, or I really appreciated the way you listened to me in that meeting. Just little things. There's a legendary servant leader patriarch, Kim Blanchard, who some of your listeners may be familiar with, who loves to talk about the concept of catch them doing something right. And so how often, do leaders only sort of give you feedback when you've done something, quote, wrong or not up to standards or whatever it may be? And yes, there has to be feedback conversations when those things happen. But those conversations are so much easier when you have this foundation of care, connection, and contribution, because people feel trusted, they feel valued, and they know that their leader has their best interests at heart. So those messages are a lot easier to receive. But again, when a leader points out, I think there's a stat, like you need to hear like a 5-to-1 ratio of positive feedback to negative feedback, or else that negative feedback is really going to have a toxic effect as opposed to being a growth opportunity. And so the more times that you or your peers can point out how somebody made a difference, and it doesn't have to be a monumental achievement or huge business outcome, just a little thing. In fact, recognizing those little things are really how you get to the big things.
Thanks for explaining that. The theme of this podcast is asking our guests to share examples of people getting stuck and what happened to get unstuck. Can I ask that same question of you? Would you be willing to share an example where perhaps maybe a client of yours got stuck, and what is it that you and your client together were able to do to get that client unstuck?
Yeah, there's a really nice success story with one of my clients that I coached through this earlier this year. And it was really just, we had two coaching sessions. And with that, she was able to get unstuck with her team. And I'll tell you a little bit, about the background of what was going on. And this is a person who, like everybody pretty much these days, he was leading a remote team. I will throw in the fact here that most of her team are millennials, and she is a Gen Xer. And so there's some generational things that you have to account for there as well. And she was expressing to me that she was really sort of frustrated because her team was not very engaged. They weren't really completing work, or they weren't completing it on deadline. And they were feeling, to use your terms, she was feeling stuck with them. And the more I listened to her talk about what was going on and how her team was performing and behaving, and started asking some of these questions, it was really clear to me that honestly, I didn't say this word explicitly at the time, but her team was not feeling cared for, because really I could tell that all of the conversations that they were having were just strictly about deadlines and work and tasks and rules, whatever it may be. There was no human level of conversation. And then, they weren't feeling connected to each other. They were, geographically dispersed. They were obviously all virtual. And so there wasn't, I asked her to tell me about some of the structure of her weekly meetings. And there was no time carved out in those meetings for connection building. It was all, again, work, check-ins, status updates, things like that. And then I asked, how was she recognizing? Like, how does she recognize, when people do something well? Or how does she bring out the best in her people? And it was just really simple things that, she was not really taking the time to ask, hey, is there something that you would like to do, or something you would like to spend more time on, some sort of skill you have that you're not getting to use enough? and she wasn't really giving specific recognition of people and the work that they were. Absolutely, she would acknowledge, hey, thanks for getting that done, or nice job, but nothing really specific, nothing really real time. And so we sort of worked through. I gave her some conversation starters, some sort of intention setting that she could do, and sort of a template, if you will, about how she can surface a greater sense of contribution and make people feel like their work uniquely matters. She started doing that for, I guess it was probably like 4 or 6 weeks later. And she says it's a completely different level of engagement from her team. They're all still remote, of course. It's all still the same people, but they're much more engaged. They're much more innovative. They're not just doing work to get it done, but they're actually bringing new ideas. And so I feel like that's a real success story by just going back to these hyper basic principles of human needs.
And you just effectively model the 3 C's, and that is you try to encourage her to demonstrate caring by paying attention to the contributions that individuals and collectively the group is making, recognizing what happens, and in turn, that obviously strengthens the connection. That's a great illustration. Thank you for sharing that. Jason, you've really given us some great information, but if you were to summarize the kinds of things you want to make sure that we've heard in our time together, what might be those takeaways?
Yeah, I think the default in some leaders is well, we don't have time for all this touchy feely, stuff.
Hmm.
And my argument would be that you don't have time not to. You kind of have to slow down to go fast. And again, it's called Prelude for a reason, because when you can do these things at the outset as much as you can, um, people are going to go faster. They're going to work harder. They're going to care more. Imagine how much more employees will care about your customers when they feel cared for at work. So I would just challenge leaders to ask one, carve out one-on-one time to talk about things that aren't related to work, and ask the extra questions. Listen to understand, pay attention to what matters to people and what's going on in their lives and where they want to go. Do things to make people feel seen, heard, and valued as a person, not as an employee. Um, Make daily or at least weekly intentions to build connection by adding a few minutes to connect on a human level with your team in meetings. Take steps to sort of listen to where there might be overlap in interest or passions amongst your employees, and maybe use some storytelling to connect them to a shared purpose. That's a really great sort of sealant, if you will, on this connection piece, is creating that sense of shared purpose and communicating it on a regular basis. And storytelling goes a long way towards that. And then again, with contribution, that catch them doing something right it's such a simple thing, but we don't do it so well because people take things for granted, I guess. And giving people autonomy and ownership, letting people use their superpowers, whether that's something that you feel is valuable or not, it's valuable to them. And if they're getting the work done that you expect them, let them get it done in their own way. And then recognize them for how somebody made a difference, whether it's a behavior or a completion of a task or just their way of being. Recognize them very specifically in real time as much as you can for how they made a difference. And then when you do that, people are going to feel like they matter. And I use the word feel also very intentionally, because it's not just knowing that you matter. You have to feel it, because if you want to get to people's head, get the most out of what's in people's heads, or get the most out of what they can do with their hands, my argument is you have to go through their hearts. You have to make them feel this stuff. And when they do, they become superheroes. And that's what every leader should hopefully be doing, is making heroes out of their team. And you do that by caring for them, connecting them to something bigger than themselves, and helping them understand how what they do matters.
Jason, those are great takeaways. If someone wants to reach out to you to perhaps continue this conversation or learn more, what's the best way for them to connect with you online?
Yeah, find me on LinkedIn, Jason Meucci, Meucci. I'm there. And then, on Twitter, I tweet a lot about this stuff at jmeucci. And then just new, fairly new by the time this comes out, is there's a Twitter handle for this model, and I call it's at Leader Prelude on Twitter.
Fantastic. Jason, thank you. You were a great guest. I knew you would be, but you also explained things in a way by going through those 3 C's for us. I really appreciate your willingness to give us that Prelude to Leadership model. Thank you.
You're quite welcome. It's exciting to talk about this. It's a difference maker.
Well, I can see that excitement in your eyes and in your voice. And I also want to thank our listeners who have joined us for this episode of Get Unstuck and On Target. We've lined up great thought leaders like Jason that I'm sure you'll enjoy getting to know. We upload the latest episode every Thursday, and I hope you'll subscribe via Apple, Spotify, whatever your favorite platform might be. But if you've been listening to my discussion with Jason, and you're realizing that something is keeping you or your company stuck, let's talk. Visit unstuck.show to schedule a call. We'll explore what's got you or your company stuck and what you perhaps can do to overcome it. So I'd like to thank you for joining us, and I hope you've picked up some tips that'll help you get unstuck and on target. Until next time.